Hello, fellow book lovers, both readers and writers. I am Maddie Dalrymple. I'm the author of the Ann Kinnear suspense novels and suspense shorts and Lizzie Ballard thrillers. And I also write, speak, and consult on the writing craft and the publishing voyage as the Indy author. And I share what I learn each week on the Indy Author Podcast. And you can learn more about me at maddiedalrymple.com and at theindyauthor.com. And this is my video series, What I Learned, where I ask authors 2 questions about their latest book. What did they learn from their latest book that they'd like to share with their fellow writers? And what did they learn from their latest book that they'd like to share with their fellow readers? And I am here today with Cliff Beach. Hey, Cliff, how are you doing?
Hi, Maddie. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. To give our listeners and viewers a little background on you, author and musician Cliff Beach is the host of the Deeper Grooves podcast and Deeper Grooves on 885 FM. He's the winner of the John Lennon Songwriting Contest Grand Prize, 2 World Songwriting Awards, 4 Global Music Awards, and a California Music and Video Film Award, and has been nominated for many more. His music has been featured on the CW, HBO Max, and a BMW spot, and his single Confident was featured on Spotify All Funked Up and Funk Drive playlists. And he is the author of the book Side Hustle and Flow. And so today I am asking Cliff the 2 What I Learned questions about his book, starting with, Cliff, what did you learn from your latest book that you would like to share with your fellow authors?
Well, that's a very good question. It's my first book. So for authors that have written many books, I don't know if I have advice for that. But for a first-time authors, I have a lot of great information. It was a pandemic project for me. So I think if you want to write, there's no better time than to start and to write. I think the hardest thing is to start, and the second hardest thing is to finish. The writing process, as you know, Maddie, is a very grueling process. So I think Ernest Hemingway said, "You write drunk and you edit sober." I don't drink anymore, but essentially, yeah, I think for me, the editing process was harder than the actual writing process. So we go back to the writing process. I think the first thing I would say to first time writers is if you haven't written, take a course. So I took a course during the pandemic from Scribe Media. Tucker Max, who's a best-selling author, has a free course that people can take. And so really, I think the main 2 points of the course that were helpful to me is the outlining process. It helped me outline in the very beginning, within 24 hours, the entire book. And there was a parking lot there for, you may have multiple books inside you. So I wanted to be very clear on what this one book was going to be. And then it also had a timeline for the writing. So I set up to create the rough draft in 90 days. So it gave me a timeline to be able to methodically sit down and write every day essentially and do that. And I was writing for about an hour to 2 hours a day. And what they call the rough draft actually is cool. They call it a vomit draft. And so really the whole point is that you're trying to throw up all this idea at once, because one of the biggest hurdles as a writer to the writing process is to try to edit simultaneously while you're writing the rough draft. So if you're writing and you go back to every line or every paragraph or every page or every chapter and you say, well, I could do it better. Of course you can. Of course you can. But that will slow down the process. So just write forward all the way through. So I didn't look back at anything I had written until 90 days was done and the 10 chapters for the book was done. And that's when we started to look at it again through the editing process, which again, I think mine took about 10 edits all the way through. So that was one thing. I think the next thing that I learned through the process is that if you're going to, originally I was going to self-publish, and I think self-publishing is great. They have places like BookBaby that can help you do that. And I ended up through Fiverr using that to pitch to publishers and agents, and found an indie publisher in the UK that actually pushed out the book. So had I had known I was going to do that process, I may have just edited the book myself, because the publisher ended up editing it again. I didn't do that because I thought I was going to self-publish. So then I paid to have other editors and proofreaders before I got it to the editor. Now for me, because I wouldn't say I remembered high school or college English well to know syntax and stuff like that. I'm not what I call a copy cop. So I think you need editors for sure, and I respect all that they do. So for me, I think it was still money well spent to have that done, because I think the book was further up the road to get it to the publisher. But if you are going to go the traditional publishing route, which I ended up doing, then you may be okay with just editing yourself, knowing that they're going to edit it again. So that was part of that 10 rounds of edits. They did 2 rounds of edits in addition to the ones I did and the ones that I used Reedsy for to do that. I think as a platform, Reedsy it's amazing. There's ways that you can work with not only people to help you put your book together, so doing like the inside of the book, doing the artwork. You can also find public relations agents if you want to promote your book that way on there. So I think that's a great resource on the platform, Reedsy.com.
I
So
just
that
have
was
to
helpful.
take a moment to put in a shameless plug for the podcast because I got to interview Ricardo Fayette, who is the founder of Reedsy,
Mhm.
and we talked about how to create a team, a professional team to support your publishing efforts. So that was a really fun conversation, and I like to hear what you're saying about Reedsy as well. It is a great platform.
And I'll have to check out that podcast episode because I think he has some great information. He's written a book on it as well. Chandler Bolton, the Self Publishing School, that book published, I think is very helpful for people doing the self publishing route as well. And I think there's pros and cons to both. So as a author, I don't think there's any right or wrong way. I think there's some real big pros in the self-publishing world because you're able to have more control over if you want to run Amazon ads and things like that than you do with the publisher. But at the same time, publishers have distribution network and can get you into physical stores as well as digital and stuff like that. So I think those are some things to think about. For me, I have the book in all the four major formats. So we did the written one, so that came out in hardcover. Then we did a Kindle version. Then I also did the audiobook, which I narrated. And then we did the soft cover. So I think if you want to do an audiobook, it's cool. I think if you want to narrate it yourself, my book is self-help or nonfiction. So it makes sense coming from the author. If your book is more fiction or fantasy, there may be voiceover actors that may be better to do different character voice and stuff. I'm not sure, but I've seen some amazing voiceover work for audiobooks where they really go in deep with how they use the tones and the sound of their voice. I think it's ambitious recording the audiobook. So after the editing process was very daunting, I got to a point where you lose objectivity. So it's nice to take space, I think, as an author from your book for a while and then coming back to it because when you're in it all the time, I got to a point where I was like, I shut up. Like, I don't want to hear any more of my own thoughts. And then after that was done, the written book was done, and then we did the audio book, and it was the same thing. After 6 grueling days, 18 hours of tape, I was like, I never want to read this or hear my voice ever again. But now that it's out and I hear it, months later, then the objectivity is there, and I'm like, oh no, it's actually pretty good. So I think the main thing is just stay encouraged. It is difficult. Everybody, a lot of people want to write books, but not everybody will because it is a pretty long task. I think the whole process for me was 2 years plus. So it's not for the faint of heart and definitely for the diligent. But at the same time, I think there's so many lower barriers to entry to the marketplace. And if you want to write a book, getting it out there yourself. So I think if you want to do it, there's no better time than now to do it. And I think as an author, you owe it to yourself. If you don't get that book out there, then that idea from you that only you can give, we won't get. So I think that's what I would say to authors is that try not to overthink it. Try to just, get your ideas out there. And if you have multiple books inside you, then if you don't get it all out in the first book, then you'll have others, and maybe you'll make a series, or maybe you'll learn and improve. I think I heard that Henry Ford. Someone asked him like, how what's the secret to success, and he said, well, you have to make wise decisions. And the person said, well, how do you make wise decisions? And they said, you have to get experience. And he said, well, how do you get experience? He says, by making stupid decisions. So in the end, I think you have to write, and as you write through it, it'll get better as a process over time.
Well, I have to ask, this is a little bit off what I learned, but maybe not, how your creative process with your book was the same as or differed from your creative process with your music.
Yeah, there are a lot of similarities. I think for me, after writing a book, I do enjoy the collaborative process of music. Book is very singular and solo in a lot of ways, but you do get to build a team, so that's nice. I do have one more what I've learned, just remembering for authors is that, and for music that's similar, is that the creation process, we're so excited and want to be able to birth this baby essentially. But then you don't birth a baby and that's it, right? You have to raise it and you have to do stuff. So like you have to remember that the marketing process and the PR process is like a huge deal. Like you have to get the book out there and people know that it's out there. And whether that's submitting for awards or whatever it is, it's like that's a whole nother mind and a whole, that's the art meeting commerce. So there are similarities there that it's not just like okay, we run the race to the finish line, it's over. It's like, oh no, now we have to do interviews and podcasts like yourself. You have to get out there and do
That's a
that. And
great
so
analogy. I love the you have to raise the baby in addition to give birth to the baby. That's really good.
yeah, so but in terms of music, it's similar in terms of you have like your writing time and your pre-production time, and then you do have a lot of editing for music as well. So similar, but the processes are different. I definitely think that music, especially with a band and instruments, it's a little bit more feeling oriented, I think. Whereas books to me can be a little bit, at least my type of book, self-help was a little bit more stoic, I guess. But I think I read the book by Robert McKee, Story, and he explains that you're able to tell different stories in different mediums. So I think that was the beauty for me as a musician transitioning into being an author, is that I was able to get ideas out in a different way, in a different medium that could support that idea differently than songs will. Because songs in 3 minutes or 5 minutes, that's the time you have. Whereas a book, I had almost 250 pages, which and tape took about 7.5 hours. So I think that's the beauty of that, is like he explains, like when you're writing a script and you're working on a movie, like a movie gives you 90 minutes, whereas like series, like I love Law and Order, it has like 20 seasons, so that gives you a longer arc to be able to tell the story. So different mediums are able to do that. And then I really love what he said about when people talk about books and movies, and they say, I read the book and then the movie pales in comparison. Well, obviously, because when you're reading a book, you're the director. You get to create the world and the universe in your own mind, and it's always going to be better. What you create in your mind is going to be better than you can see on, this is what the director's mind is saying. I think, but I think again, whether you're doing music or whether you're doing writing or any other creative arts, I just think do it as much as possible, fail forward, fail fast, because it's a learning process all along the way, if you choose to look back and learn from it.
I love all that advice. I'm going to use this as an opportunity to switch over to the reader side. So what did you learn from your book that you would like to share with your fellow readers?
Well, I've always been an avid reader. So when I was a kid, they had kind of a Scholastic bookmobile, and you get stickers and you get a bunch of books. So I think for me as a reader, I think there's a few things. One, I want readers to know to continue reading. I think that leaders are readers, and for whatever genre you're reading, I just think having that the way you read written word and understand it is different. Not everybody learns or absorbs that way or is entertained that way, but again, I think it's nice to have a diverse portfolio of not just always binging Netflix, but actually reading books. And I think people should read actual physical books as well as digital books, because I think there is just like I collect vinyl records, I think there's something in the energy of having something physical, and you appreciate it, I think, differently too, because actually physically going out to a bookstore, it's like you're entering the community and you're supporting local business, and I think that's important. I think support local businesses. Like I did my book signing locally at a local bookstore that was very small, because I didn't want to do one of the larger chain bookstores, because I want to support these places. The place where I did my book signing was a place in Culver City, California, called Village Well, and they were in that kind of commercial real estate location that has turned over multiple times. So I was like surprised that a bookstore would be able to last longer than the restaurants and other stuff that they've had in there in the past. So I think kudos to them, especially opening pretty close to the pandemic. So I think, yeah, again, support local businesses, local shops, but then also support local artists. If local artists are talking about their books and things like that, then go. And even if it's something you don't know anything about, you'll learn something. And again, it's creating a community. And then again, I really encourage people, because I think there are people who are natural readers, so they don't need as much encouragement, but I encourage other people who haven't read anything in a very long time. So there's statistics that show that people after high school, they just don't really read at all. So I think just encouraging people to read, even if it's one book a year or something, I think, again, there's just something in your brain that happens from reading something that's very different than watching something. I think watching things can sometimes become mindless. So as I try to focus more on mindfulness, I think sometimes reading a book can be a part of that. And again, like I was saying, being the own director of your own in your own mind, I think that's interesting to me. I think tapping into that creativity. And that's another thing is that people, statistically show they have less creativity as life goes on because they're not focusing on things that make them creative. So that's why I think that people should write. But obviously, you need people on both sides. So you need people writing the books and you need people reading the books. So I definitely encourage all people to read something, doesn't matter what genre. And if you haven't read anything, I think this is a great kind of New Year's or mid New Year's resolution that you can do.
Great. Well, Cliff, I love everything you have to say so much. And I want to make sure people know how to get to Side Hustle and Flow. So please let the viewers and listeners know where they can go to find out more about you and your book online.
Excellent. Well, online on social media, you can find me at Cliff Beach Music on all social platforms. And then to find the book, Side Hustle and Flow, it's on Amazon and Audible. You can also go to sidehustleandflow.net, my website, or blackspringpressgroup.com, which is the published website.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Manny. Take care.